My father, a retired admiral, barred me from my own sister's wedding, calling me a traitor. My sister wrote disgrace on my invitation. They thought they had destroyed me 6 years ago. What they didn't know is that I was coming back to that wedding as an admiral myself. My name is Amelia Hayes. I am 36 years old, and for 6 agonizing hours, I had allowed myself to believe in the absurd notion of a second chance. The 6-hour drive up the coast to Newport, Rhode Island, was a pilgrimage fueled by a desperate, flickering hope that the years of silence had somehow softened the stone hearts of my family. The June air, thick with the salty promise of the Atlantic, felt like a cruel mockery of the homecoming I had pictured. I had prepared for this day like a soldier preparing for a diplomatic parley on hostile ground. My armor was a simple, elegant navy blue silk dress, the only truly expensive thing I had ever bought for myself. It was meant to be a statement of quiet dignity, a visual plea that I was still one of them. But the moment I stepped out of my car at the grand rose-covered archway of the Ida Lewis Yacht Club, I knew I was a fool. A mountain of a man in a tight black suit blocked my path, his posture an impassable declaration of no entry. He avoided my gaze, his eyes fixed on some point over my shoulder as he lifted a radio to his mouth. "Admiral, sir." His voice was a flat, impersonal drone. "The subject has arrived." The static that followed was a sound I knew well from my years in the Navy. The charged pause before a command is given. It stretched for an eternity, sucking the very air from my lungs. Then the voice of my father, Admiral Arthur Hayes, crackled through the speaker. It was a voice I once associated with strength and honor, but now it was just a rasp, as sharp and cold as shrapnel. "I've made my position clear. This family does not harbor traitors. Do not let it take a single step past that gate. Is that understood?" It. He had called me it. A tremor started in my hand as I mechanically extended the invitation toward the guard. It was a useless, pathetic gesture, a final dying appeal to a civility that had just been executed before my eyes. The heavy, cream-colored cardstock felt like a lead weight. My name, Captain Amelia Hayes, was beautifully embossed in gold script, a relic from a life that was no longer mine. The guard took it, his lip curling into a sneer of contempt as he glanced down, then pushed it back at me. It was then that I saw the violation. Scrawled across the elegant gold lettering in the furious leaking red ink of a ballpoint pen were 2 words in my sister Olivia's looping handwriting, the very handwriting I had patiently guided her hand to form when we were children, sharing a bedroom. "Stay away, disgrace." Each crudely formed letter was a fresh stab, twisting a blade that had been lodged in my heart for 6 years. The air I tried to draw in was sharp, ragged, and refused to fill my lungs. I forced my chin up, my military training kicking in, and scanned the scene beyond the gate. My eyes landed on Aunt Carol and Uncle Bob, their faces etched with a brief, panicked recognition before they spun around, suddenly engrossed in a loud, performative critique of a nearby sailboat. Their averted gazes, their silent, cowardly retreat was a public confirmation of my banishment. It was an act of quiet complicity that felt more damning than my father's brutal command. Through the perfectly trimmed hedges that separated the celebrated from the exiled, I saw them, the perfect tableau. My father, resplendent in his dress whites, was clinking glasses with a U.S. senator, his laughter echoing across the lawn. My mother, a portrait of maternal pride, was fussing with the silk Vera Wang sash on Olivia's wedding gown. And Olivia, she was radiant, a star of pure joy, oblivious to the darkness just beyond the manicured perimeter. She was laughing, her head thrown back, as she gazed adoringly at the man whose arm she held, Maxwell Thorne. Suddenly, his gaze lifted and locked with mine. His smile never wavered, but his eyes, cold, dark, and utterly devoid of warmth, held a flash of raw, undisguised triumph. He saw me. He knew I was standing here, branded and cast out. With an almost imperceptible slowness, a gesture of intimate cruelty meant only for me. He raised his flute of champagne in a silent, mocking salute. He had won. It wasn't enough to destroy my career and obliterate my honor. He had to possess my family, too. The burning agony in my chest began to cool and harden, crystallizing into a dense, heavy block of ice that settled deep in my soul. I would not give them the satisfaction of my tears. I would not cry, not here, not ever for them. I took a deliberate step backward, melting into the deep shadow of a massive ancient oak tree that stood like a silent sentinel at the club's entrance. I remembered my father on a long-ago summer afternoon, placing his hand on its rough bark. "This tree is like our family, Amelia," he'd said, "resilient, unbreakable." He was wrong. Resilience and cruelty are two very different things. My eyes drifted past the celebration, toward the harbor, where a fleet of white sails cut cleanly through the deep blue of the Atlantic. The sight, once a source of pride and inspiration, now triggered a memory so sharp it felt like a physical blow. I was 19 again, standing ramrod straight in my stiff new cadet uniform, smelling the polish and the promise. My father had pulled me into a fierce embrace, his voice thick with a pride I could feel in my bones. "You are my legacy, Amelia," he had whispered, "my greatest legacy." Now, standing in the shadows, I finally understood. That legacy hadn't just been forgotten. It had been intentionally and ruthlessly thrown away, discarded like common trash. Standing in the cool shadow of the indifferent oak tree, the humiliation of the present moment bled seamlessly into the bitterness of the past. The seeds of this public execution weren't sown today at a yacht club gate. They were planted years ago, nurtured in the fertile soil of my family's gilded cage. My mind drifted back to a dinner 6 years earlier. It was in our family's formal oak-paneled dining room, a stately space with grand windows overlooking the turbulent gray waters of the Atlantic. The table was set with heavy silver and heirloom china, gleaming under the soft light of a crystal chandelier. I had just returned from a grueling 3-month deployment in the South China Sea. As a lieutenant commander in naval intelligence, my mission had been a covert success, yielding invaluable data that would protect American lives and assets. I was gaunt and exhausted, my skin still carrying the sallow tint of recycled submarine air and chronic sleep deprivation. But I was brimming with a fierce, quiet pride. I wanted, more than anything, for my father to share it with me. "Dad," I began, my voice thrumming with an eagerness I couldn't contain, "I think the data we collected is going to fundamentally change how the Navy approaches anti-submarine warfare." He cut me off, not with words, but with a casual, dismissive wave of his hand, as if swatting away an irritating gnat. "Amelia, please," he sighed, his full attention on the delicate, surgical task of cracking a lobster claw. "Let's not bring your work to the dinner table. It ruins the flavor of the lobster." He dropped a perfect piece of meat onto his plate, then turned his full beaming attention to my sister, seated opposite me. "Olivia, darling, tell us about that charity gala you organized. Your mother mentioned it was a spectacular success." Olivia, her fingernails perfectly manicured and painted a demure shade of ballet slipper pink, launched into a breathless, dramatic account of her struggles with florists and caterers. My parents hung on her every word, their faces glowing with a parental adoration I hadn't seen directed at me in years. My mother, Catherine, then turned her gaze on me, her expression a careful, practiced blend of pity and disapproval. "Amelia, honey, just look at you. Your skin is so weathered, and your hair, it's simply parched. A woman has a duty to take care of herself, you know." She reached across the table, her hand finding Olivia's, and giving it a gentle, affirming squeeze. "Thank goodness my Olivia has always been so lovely, so graceful. She has a tender heart, you see. Not like someone who only thinks about warships and classified codes." I sat there, frozen, the piece of rich, buttery lobster in my mouth, suddenly turning to ash. It was tasteless, bitter. I was an officer in the United States Navy. I had volunteered for a high-risk assignment, but in their eyes, my sacrifice, my dedication, was an unsightly flaw worth less than a high society party. Across the table, Olivia's eyes met mine for a fleeting second. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. It was the smile of quiet, certain victory. She knew, and I knew, that no matter what I accomplished in the world, I would never be their perfect daughter. And then came the day of judgment, the final one. After I was formally accused of treason and faced with a court-martial, I came home. I was desperate, searching for a single ally, a flicker of belief in the family that was supposed to be my bedrock. I found them in the library, a room that always smelled of old leather and lemon polish, its walls lined with the stoic, painted faces of generations of Hayes men in their naval uniforms. My father wouldn't even look at me. His gaze was fixed on a portrait of his own father, a decorated vice admiral. "Your grandfather lived and died for honor," he said, his voice dangerously low, each word a stone. "And you spat on everything we represent, everything he stood for." "Dad, I was framed. I can prove it," I pleaded, my voice cracking with a desperation that shamed me. His hand slammed down on the heavy mahogany desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "Silence!" he roared, his face a mask of purple fury. "The Hayes name has been dragged through the mud. It is ruined. You are no longer my daughter." Behind him, Olivia stood like a tragic heroine, her hands pressed to her face, her shoulders shaking with staged sobs. But as she peeked through her fingers, her eyes met mine. I saw it clearly, the unmistakable, triumphant glint of raw satisfaction. "You've disappointed me so much, Amelia," she whispered, her voice thick with perfect, counterfeit sorrow. In that moment, they were a united front. They had built a fortress of judgment with the stones of their own prejudice and fear, and I was left outside, alone in the freezing cold. The ache of that memory was still a physical presence, a phantom limb of pain. They had been my judge, jury, and executioner, convicting me without a trial, all to protect the pristine public image of our family name. I had been sacrificed on the altar of their reputation. Have you ever been there? Have you ever given everything you had to a dream, to a duty, only to have the people who should have been your greatest champions become your harshest critics? To have your worth measured not by your character or your accomplishments, but by how well you fit into the box they built for you? That's the question that hung in the air as I stood there under the shelter of that great oak. It was the answer to my own silent question. After all of this, why did I come back here? The truth rose from the icy depths of my soul, clear and absolute. I didn't come back seeking their approval. I came back to take back my life. And that war, I realized, didn't start today. It started 6 long years ago, with a lonely drive into oblivion. After my father's final verdict, I vanished. I got in my car and just drove west, with no destination in mind, running on cheap coffee and a dwindling savings account. I drove until the roads turned into highways, and the highways eventually ran out of land. I stopped in Astoria, Oregon, a small, tough-as-nails port town at the mouth of the Columbia River, where the persistent fog and drizzling rain seemed to promise a perpetual state of anonymity, a place where everything, including my past, could be washed clean. The first thing I did was erase my name. Amelia Hayes ceased to exist. In her place was Amy Smith, a name so common, so utterly devoid of history, it felt like a cloak of invisibility. I rented a tiny, drafty apartment above a used bookstore, its single window offering a grim view of the gray, choppy river. My past life had been one of sterile, high-tech command centers and the hallowed halls of the Pentagon. My new life smelled of mildewed paper and damp wool. My first job was waiting tables at a 24-hour roadside diner called the Salty Dog. It was the kind of place frequented by weary truckers and fishermen with hands as rough as barnacles, men whose conversations were short and whose eyes never asked questions about where you came from. The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. I, a former naval intelligence officer who once analyzed complex satellite imagery and multi-layered geopolitical threats, was now struggling to remember who ordered the black coffee and who wanted extra cream. My hands, once trained to handle classified documents and chart naval courses, were now perpetually chapped and smelled of bleach and fried bacon. I would work double shifts until my feet swelled and a deep, burning ache settled into the small of my back, all for a handful of crumpled dollar bills at the end of the night. But the physical exhaustion was a welcome distraction from the nights. The nights were the worst. The suffocating silence of my small room was 1,000 times more terrifying than the roar of a jet engine on an aircraft carrier's deck. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, the ghosts of my past haunting my dreams. I'd see my father's furious face, Olivia's triumphant eyes, and the bold, damning headlines of newspapers that called me a traitor. There were nights I'd just sit on the cold linoleum floor, my knees pulled to my chest, staring out at the relentless rain, and genuinely wonder if I had the strength to survive until morning. To make the second month's rent, I had to sell my watch. It was a standard-issue Navy timepiece, a gift upon my graduation from the academy. It wasn't fancy, but it was a symbol of everything I had worked for, everything I had been. I walked into a pawn shop and walked out with $100. Leaving a piece of my soul behind on a dusty velvet tray. For weeks, I'd glance at my empty wrist, a constant physical reminder of my fall from grace. This was my penance. This was the price for the shame they had branded me with. I had to live with it. Slowly, things began to shift. I found a second job doing bookkeeping for a small fishing fleet. A tedious task that thankfully kept my mind too occupied for despair. I learned the names of the boats, the Sea Serpent, the Wandering Star, the Provider, and the gruff personalities of their captains. They were hard men, weathered by the sea and a lifetime of unforgiving work. But there was an honesty to them, a lack of pretense I hadn't realized I was starving for. One evening, a violent squall blew in from the Pacific, catching everyone by surprise. The waves were monstrous, and the wind howled. Over the radio, I heard a panicked call. The provider had lost its engine and was drifting, in danger of being smashed against the rocky jetty. Without thinking, I grabbed the microphone. All my years of naval training, all the forgotten knowledge of tides, currents, and wind shear, came flooding back. For 2 hours, I became their remote commander, my voice calm and steady as I talked them through it, calculating their drift, advising them on dropping anchor, and coordinating with the Coast Guard. I guided them into the relative safety of a protected cove. The next morning, the ship's captain, a grizzled old-timer named Gus, showed up at my small office. He didn't say much. He just placed a massive, beautiful silver salmon on my desk, its scales still shimmering. "Thanks, kid," he grunted, and then he left. As I stared at the fish, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel completely useless. It was a small victory, a tiny flicker of light in a vast darkness, but it was mine. I had earned it. A few days later, while reconciling fuel receipts, I found an old folded copy of the Wall Street Journal someone had left in the office. And there they were, on the front page of the society section. Olivia and Maxwell Thorne, smiling at a charity gala, their picture under a glowing headline about their shared passion for the ocean. The article lauded them as the new power couple of the maritime world. Something inside me snapped. I crushed the newspaper in my fist, the crumpling sound loud in the quiet room. The cold, dormant anger I had suppressed for so long began to thaw, a dangerous heat spreading through my veins. It was at that exact moment that my cheap burner phone, silent for months, began to ring. An unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it ring, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But some other instinct, something deeper and more primal, urged me to answer. My finger hovered over the end call button on the cheap burner phone, my whole body tense. But before I could disconnect, a voice spoke my name, a name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. "Amelia?" The voice was deep, calm, and devastatingly familiar. A jolt went through me, so powerful I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. It was Admiral Michael Sterling, my former mentor at the Naval Academy, a living legend within the intelligence community. 6 years had passed since I last heard that voice. 6 years of shame and silence. How did you find me?" I stammered, my own voice a rusty whisper. A low, warm chuckle came through the line. It was a sound of such profound kindness, it nearly broke me. "Amelia, you taught half of the best intelligence officers at the ONI how to find people. Did you really think they couldn't find their own teacher?" I was speechless. A tidal wave of shame and inadequacy washed over me, hot and suffocating. What must he think of me? The promising cadet, the decorated officer, now a disgraced waitress hiding in a forgotten corner of the country. "Sir, He cut me off, but his tone wasn't impatient. It was serious, weighted with purpose. "I never believed the official story, Amelia. Not for 1 second. I know you, and more importantly, I know how cunning our enemies can be. I need to see you." 2 days later, he came to Astoria. He arrived not in a black government sedan, but in a rented Ford Taurus, blending in perfectly with the gray, unassuming town. We met in a small, cozy coffee shop on the waterfront. The rain, which had been my constant companion for months, streamed down the windows, creating a barrier between us and the rest of the world. He didn't ask about my life as Amy Smith. He didn't offer a single word of pity or ask me to recount my fall. There was no judgment in his eyes, only the same sharp, assessing intelligence I remembered so well. He simply slid a thick, unmarked manila folder across the small wooden table. "The Navy is putting together a new off-the-books unit," he said, his voice low. "It will operate independently under my direct command, codename Triton." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "The mission is to counter economic espionage, to protect strategic maritime assets from threats that conventional law enforcement can't touch." He looked at me then, his gaze so direct it felt as if he could see straight into the wreckage of my soul. "I need a commander for this unit. I need someone with nothing left to lose, someone who understands the darkness that lives on the ocean. And most importantly, I need someone the enemy believes is already gone." He leaned forward slightly. "I need you, Amelia." The offer was a lightning strike. It was terrifying, and in a way that scared me, intensely alluring. It was a chance to fight back, to be a weapon again, instead of a victim. But the shame was a heavy cloak. "Why me?" I finally managed to ask, the words catching in my throat. "I'm a disgrace. I was dishonorably discharged." Admiral Sterling placed his hand flat on the folder, a gesture of absolute certainty. "Because honor, Amelia, isn't found on a uniform's shoulder boards or in a newspaper headline. It's found right here." He tapped his own chest, then his eyes met mine as he gestured toward me. "And here, it's in the choices we make when we think no one is watching. The Navy made a mistake when it let you go. It was a failure of the highest order. Let me give you a chance to help us correct it." That evening, he took me to dinner at the best seafood restaurant in town. It was a place with white tablecloths and quiet, respectful service. As I sat there, eating a perfectly grilled piece of salmon, a world away from the greasy food at the diner, I realized it was the first time in 6 years I was having a real meal with someone who saw me. Not the traitor, not the failure, not the family's dirty little secret. He saw Amelia Hayes, the naval officer, the person I used to be, the person I was afraid I had lost forever. In the warm glow of the restaurant, telling stories about our time at the academy, I felt a part of myself I thought was dead flicker back to life. He was the family I had chosen, and in that moment, I chose him again. I accepted his offer. After dinner, as we stood in the misty parking lot, he handed me my first assignment. It was the file from the coffee shop. "Your first intelligence brief, Commander," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. My fingers, no longer clumsy from carrying coffee pots, felt steady and sure as I opened the folder under the dim yellow light of a lamppost. It was a list of maritime corporations under special surveillance. My eyes scanned the names, a familiar professional rhythm returning to me. And then I saw it. At the very top of the list, marked with a single aggressive red star, was a name that made the blood freeze in my veins. Thorn Maritime. The shadow of my family and the face of my enemy had just merged into one. My personal war for redemption had just become a matter of national security. Under my command, the unit codenamed Triton came to life. We were ghosts, a small elite team of specialists, hackers, analysts, former field operatives, each handpicked by Admiral Sterling for their unique skills, and more importantly, for their ability to disappear. Our headquarters was a covert facility in San Diego, hidden in plain sight behind the sterile corporate facade of an oceanographic research company. The moment I stepped inside, Amy Smith, the weary waitress, was shed like a snake's skin. I was myself again, but a version honed by exile, sharper and colder than before. My life became a relentless cycle of caffeine and data. I spent 18 hours a day in front of a wall of monitors, the blue light etching lines of fatigue onto my face. Shipping routes, financial transactions, encrypted communications, satellite signals. The ocean was my chessboard once more, and this time I could see every piece in motion. Our primary target, our sole obsession, was Thorn Maritime. I immersed myself in the life of Maxwell Thorn, studying his habits, his associates, his political donations, his weaknesses. I told myself it wasn't personal anymore. It was the mission. But I was lying. Every piece of data I uncovered felt like reclaiming a stolen piece of my own life. One morning, my lead data analyst, a brilliant young man named David, quietly placed a tablet on my desk. "Commander, I think you need to see this." It was the latest issue of Forbes magazine. The cover was a glossy, sun-drenched photograph of Maxwell Thorn and my sister, Olivia, their arms linked as they stood on the deck of a magnificent superyacht. The headline, in bold, arrogant letters, proclaimed, "The new power couple of the seas." The article was a masterpiece of public relations propaganda. It praised Thorn Maritime for its supposed green initiatives and lauded Olivia as an influential ocean activist and philanthropist. The nausea began to rise in my throat as I read a quote from my sister. "My family has always taught me that honor and patriotism come first," she gushed. "That's why I am so incredibly proud of the work Maxwell is doing to ensure America's maritime security." Honor, patriotism. The words she used were the very same ones my father had used to disown me. My sister was cheerleading for the monster who had orchestrated my ruin, using our family's hallowed principles as his shield. She was either the most naive fool on the planet or a willing, smiling accomplice. I wasn't sure which was worse. The anger was a clean, cold fire. It burned away the nausea and replaced it with a laser-like focus. "David," I said, my voice low and steady, "I want every resource we have dedicated to digging into Thorn's international network. Every shell corporation, every offshore account. I want to know where every single dollar comes from and where it goes." The hunt was on. Weeks turned into a blur of sleepless nights and relentless data mining. The breakthrough came from a data sweep our team conducted on a server in Singapore, targeting a shell corporation linked to Thorn. We pulled an encrypted hard drive. For 72 agonizing hours, my team worked around the clock to break the military-grade encryption. Finally, David looked up from his console, his face pale. "Commander, you've got access." On my screen, a single file name appeared, Project Nightingale. I clicked it open. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a file, it was a blueprint, the entire detailed, meticulously planned operation to frame me 6 years ago. It was all there: surveillance logs of my movements, fabricated intelligence reports, and encrypted emails detailing the bribery of a senior officer in my former unit to alter data logs and falsify my mission report. The objective was chillingly clear: remove me, the one officer who might detect their activities, so they could freely smuggle advanced, state-of-the-art sonar technology to a hostile foreign power. I stared at the screen, my world tilting on its axis. The scandal, the court-martial, the destruction of my life. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. I was just collateral damage. A pawn sacrificed without a second thought to clear the way for a multi-billion-dollar act of treason. As I sat there, paralyzed by the sheer calculated evil of it all, a secure, encrypted call patched through to my terminal. It was Admiral Sterling. "Amelia," he said, his voice grave, I have good news and I have bad news. I remained silent, still staring at the name Project Nightingale. The good news, he continued, is that with what you've just found, we have more than enough evidence to exonerate you completely. We can begin the process immediately. He paused. The bad news. Olivia and Maxwell Thorne just announced their wedding date. They're getting married in Newport at the Ida Lewis Yacht Club. He let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final blow. I received an invitation this morning. Your name wasn't on it. The silence that followed was absolute. In my mind's eye, I saw the overflowing glass of water on the edge of a table, trembling, and with his last words, the final drop had fallen. After Admiral Sterling's final, devastating words, I terminated the secure call without a reply. A profound silence descended upon the command center, but inside my skull, a Category 5 hurricane was making landfall. I rose from my chair, my movements unnervingly precise, and walked past the questioning eyes of my team, heading straight for the facility's small utilitarian gym. I didn't bother to change. I stepped onto the nearest treadmill, stabbed the speed control until it was at its highest setting, and I began to run. The machine's mechanical whine escalated into a furious roar, a desperate grinding sound that became the soundtrack to my unraveling. I ran, my sensible dress shoes pounding a clumsy, jarring rhythm against the rapidly moving belt. My body, cold and stiff from hours at a desk, screamed in protest. I ignored it. I ran until my lungs felt like they were being scoured with hot sand, until my leg muscles began to seize and tremble uncontrollably, until sweat poured from my hairline, stinging my eyes and soaking the silk collar of my dress. For 6 long years I had held my breath. I had swallowed every insult, every condescending glance, every quiet, soul-crushing act of betrayal. I had accepted my exile as a penance. I had told myself that my stoic silence was a form of strength, a way to preserve the last tattered shreds of my dignity. What a pathetic lie. My silence wasn't strength, it was cowardice. It was a green light, a silent endorsement of their fiction. My silence had allowed them to win. It had watered the goddamned flowers on the altar where they had sacrificed me. It had paved the path my sister would now walk down, a path built directly over the rubble of my life. The roar of the treadmill was deafening, but a single crystalline thought cut through the noise, sharp and clear and absolute. No, more. My hand shot out and slammed the emergency stop button. The belt lurched to a violent halt, nearly throwing me to the floor. I stood there, bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come, my body shaking with a volatile cocktail of exhaustion and pure, unadulterated rage. I finally straightened up and met my own gaze in the large wall-mounted mirror. The woman staring back was a ghost. Her face was ashen, her professional hair disheveled, and her eyes were haunted, shadowed with 6 years of unspeakable pain. But as I watched, something new flickered to life in their depths. Not a spark, a pilot light, the kind that precedes an explosion. In that instant of stark, sweat-drenched clarity, I saw the truth. I was not Amy Smith, the invisible waitress from the edge of the world. I was no longer Amelia Hayes, the disgraced daughter, the family's tragic cautionary tale. I am Triton. I am the commander of a Black Ops unit of the United States Navy. I have the proof. I have the clearance. I have the power. I leaned closer to the mirror, my breath fogging the glass until my eyes were inches from my reflection. I made a vow to the warrior I had kept locked away for so long, and my words were a low, venomous whisper in the sterile, quiet gym. You will all pay, I promised her, every single one. My father, my mother, my sister. A cold, predatory smile I didn't recognize touched my lips. And especially you, Maxwell Thorne. I'm not just going to take back my name. I'm going to dismantle your empire, and I am going to make you and my family watch it burn. I turned and walked back to the command center, my stride now imbued with a lethal purpose. David looked up as I entered, his face a mask of concern. "Commander, are you okay?" I sat down in my command chair. My voice, when I spoke, was completely devoid of emotion. It was calm, it was controlled, it was terrifying. "David, get me Admiral Sterling on the secure line, maximum encryption." When the Admiral's familiar voice came through the speaker, I dispensed with all protocol. "Admiral, proceed with my full exoneration and reinstatement, effective immediately." I paused, letting the order hang in the air. "And sir, I'm going to need a summer white service uniform. My measurements are on file. I have a wedding to attend." There was a beat of profound silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard a sound I would never forget. A low, satisfied chuckle. "Understood, Commander. I'll make the arrangements. It's good to have you back." I ended the call and swiveled in my chair to face my team. They were all on their feet, watching me, their expressions a mixture of awe and anticipation. "Listen up," I said, my voice ringing with an authority that felt like coming home. "We have a new directive. Mission codename, Homecoming, primary objective, the Ida Lewis Yacht Club, Newport, Rhode Island." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with each of theirs. "We're going to crash a wedding, and we are going to burn an empire to the ground." The air in the room crackled. The hunt had begun. The rage that had propelled me from the gym had cooled, hardening into something far more dangerous. A meticulously crafted plan. Our sterile conference room transformed into a war room. The large central screen no longer displayed shipping lanes, but a detailed schematic of the Ida Lewis Yacht Club, complete with guest lists, event schedules, and security patrol routes. I stood before my team, the exhaustion and anger replaced by a cold, razor-sharp focus. I was no longer Amy Smith or the broken daughter of the Hayes family. I was the commander of Triton. "Operation Homecoming has 2 objectives," I began, my voice clear and precise, each word clipped. "Primary objective, neutralize and apprehend Maxwell Thorne for economic espionage. Secondary objective, obtain direct admissible confessions from any and all co-conspirators on site." My finger tapped the screen, pointing to the club's layout. "David, I want you to penetrate the club's internal security network. I want total control of every camera and microphone on the premises. I want to see and hear everything. Sarah, you are communications. You will maintain our secure link to the off-site NCIS tactical team, not a single dropped packet. Marco," I said, looking at my best field agent, "you will be my eyes and ears on the ground. Close proximity, blend in." They all nodded in unison. There were no questions, no hesitation. They trusted me. The weight of that trust was a new kind of armor, stronger than any I'd worn before. In the midst of our strategic planning, a priority notification giggled on my screen. A new encrypted email. My pulse quickened. It was from a Lieutenant Miller, a junior officer who had served under me 6 years ago. He had been one of the few who had looked me in the eye with something other than contempt when I was stripped of my command. The message was short. "Commander, I never believed them. For 6 years I've lived with the guilt of not speaking up. I saved something. I hope it can still help." Attached was a single audio file. My hands felt unsteady as I put on my headphones. I clicked play, The sound was muffled, but the voices were clear. It was a covert recording from the night I was framed. I heard the voice of the officer who had replaced me, speaking to an unidentified person. "Thorne's paying top dollar for this," the officer boasted, his voice slick with greed. "Just have to alter a few lines in the log. The Hayes girl will never know what hit her. She'll be the perfect scapegoat." My heart stopped. My breath hitched. I listened to it again, then a third time, the missing piece, the smoking gun. It wasn't just a plan anymore. It was a confession. This was the silver bullet. A few days before the wedding, a special courier delivered a secure package to our facility. It was a long, flat box. Inside, wrapped in protective silk, lay a pristine, tailor-made navy summer white service uniform. Next to it was a small, velvet-lined box. I opened it. Resting on a bed of dark blue velvet was a single, gleaming silver star. The rank insignia of a rear admiral, lower half. Admiral Sterling had not only kept his word, he had accelerated my promotion. My exoneration was now official. I took the uniform into my private quarters and put it on. It fit perfectly. The crisp white fabric, a stark contrast to the drab, functional clothing I had worn for years. I stood before a full-length mirror and looked at the woman staring back. I didn't just see a naval officer. I saw justice. I saw retribution. That single silver star on my shoulder wasn't just a rank. It was a weapon. It was a message to my father, to my family, to the entire establishment that had cast me out. It declared, without a single word, that I was back, not to plead for forgiveness, but to deliver a verdict. I was finally ready for the final battle. The night before the wedding, I stood alone in the war room. The screens around me glowed with data. I held a single tablet in my hand, my entire arsenal contained within its slim frame. The complete Project Nightingale blueprint, Lieutenant Miller's audio file, and the irrefutable financial trail of Thorne's illegal transactions. Everything was in place. "David," I said into the quiet room, "time check." He looked up from his console, a digital countdown clock glowing behind him. "T-minus 24 hours, Commander." I gave a single sharp nod. "Good. Operation Homecoming is a go." I turned away from the screens and walked toward my quarters, where the brilliant white uniform hung, waiting. Tomorrow I was going home. The soft, elegant strains of a Viennese waltz snagged, stuttered, and died. In the opulent ballroom of the Ida Lewis Yacht Club, 100 private conversations evaporated at once. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips, laughter caught in throats. A single unified wave of confusion washed over the room as every head turned toward the grand arched entrance. And into that sudden, cathedral-like silence, I walked. Each step of my polished black shoes on the marble floor was a deliberate, percussive beat, a drum signaling a declaration of war. My summer white uniform was a searing beacon, an apparition of pure military white in a sea of muted pastels and designer black tie. Above the formal gold stripes on my sleeves, the single silver star on each of my shoulder boards captured and fractured the light from the immense crystal chandeliers, glinting with a cold, hard fire. Dozens of naval officers, both active duty and long retired, were scattered among the guests. Their reaction was not a choice. It was a reflex, a response drilled into them by a lifetime of discipline and tradition. All across the room, backs straightened, shoulders squared. A silent, potent current of deference, of respect for rank, electrified the air. It was a language my father understood better than any other. I saw him standing near the towering 7-tier wedding cake. He froze, his hand, the one holding a champagne flute, beginning to tremble uncontrollably. A splash of gold liquid spilled, a dark stain on the pristine linen. I saw my sister, Olivia, her face losing all its color in an instant, leaving her a ghastly white that clashed with the creamy ivory of her Vera Wang gown. And I saw Maxwell Thorne. The smug, proprietary confidence on his face didn't just falter, it shattered, disintegrating into raw, slack-jawed shock. I ignored the audible gasps and frantic whispers that erupted in my wake, my gaze a laser beam locked on the trio at the center of the room. I walked a direct, unwavering path to them. Maxwell tried to recover, to muster the practiced arrogance that was his trademark, but his eyes were glued to the silver stars on my shoulders. They were symbols of a power he could not buy, a world he could not infiltrate, and an authority he was now subject to. "Father, Olivia," I said. My voice was calm, perfectly level, and it carried with chilling clarity across the now dead silent ballroom. "Congratulations on your wedding." I paused, letting them absorb the full, terrifying surreality of the moment. I brought a gift. I raised the slim black tablet in my hand. With a single deliberate tap of my finger, I hijacked the celebration. The two massive projection screens flanking the bandstand, which had been cycling through a romantic slideshow of the happy couple, flickered and changed. My gift to them. In place of sun-drenched beaches and smiling portraits, the screens now displayed the title page of a classified naval intelligence document, its header stamped in bold official red, Project Nightingale. Then, from the state-of-the-art sound system, a man's voice, oily, conspiratorial, and soaked in greed, began to speak, filling every corner of the vast room. It was the audio file from Lieutenant Miller, the silver bullet I had kept polished and ready. "Thorne's paying top dollar for this," the voice boasted. "Just have to alter a few lines in the log. The Hayes girl will never know what hit her." A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the ballroom. Thorne's powerful business partners and political allies, men who had been laughing with him moments before, began to instinctively, almost comically, take small steps away from him, creating a visible quarantine zone of distrust. "Amelia, you're insane," Olivia shrieked, her voice a thin, desperate wire of sound. It was a pathetic attempt to rewrite the scene, to paint me as the villain. "You're just doing this because you're jealous." I turned my head slowly, deliberately, to face my sister. My eyes were as empty of warmth as a winter sky. "Jealousy, Olivia?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Is that the reason you kept your mouth shut when your new husband here transferred $2 million to an untraceable shell corporation in the Cayman Islands the week after I was dishonorably discharged?" Another tap on the tablet. The screens blinked, now displaying a crystal-clear image of the international wire transfer, dates, routing numbers, and all. The final irrefutable nail in their coffin. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Maxwell Thorne made a guttural, choking sound and physically collapsed backward into an ornate velvet chair, his body going limp as if his spine had been removed. My mother let out a strangled, weeping sob, her hand flying to her mouth. Olivia stared at her broken new husband, then back at me, her eyes reflecting the pure, unadulterated horror of a creature caught in a trap it never saw coming. And my father, the great Admiral Arthur Hayes, the pillar of honor, the man who had sacrificed his own daughter for his reputation, could only stand there, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, muttering a single broken phrase. "No, it can't be. It cannot be." Their carefully staged masterpiece had just been demolished before. a captive audience of their most esteemed peers. I let the tableau of their ruin hang in the air for one long, satisfying moment. Then I took the final few steps until I was standing directly in front of my father. I looked him straight in the eye, holding his terrified gaze with my own. "You chose to believe a traitor to protect the family honor," I said, my voice no longer soft, but as hard and unyielding as the steel of a warship. "So tell me, Admiral, where is that honor now?" In the chaotic aftermath, as stunned guests whispered and wedding planners wept, I faced my father. The great Admiral Arthur Hayes couldn't meet my eyes. His gaze darted around the ruined ballroom, anywhere but at me, as he mumbled brokenly about honor and legacy. I cut him off, my voice flat, devoid of the anger that had fueled me for years. It was replaced by a chilling clarity. "Honor isn't what people say about you at cocktail parties, Father. It's what you do when you think no one is watching." I took a step closer. "You watched your daughter being falsely accused, and you chose to turn your back on her to protect a business interest, a glittering facade. That isn't honor, that's cowardice." For the first time in my life, I saw the invincible Admiral look small, pathetic. The carefully constructed edifice of his authority had crumbled, leaving behind only a frightened old man. I thought it was for the best," he stammered. "Best for whom?" I pressed, my question a clinical strike. "For you or for Maxwell Thorne?" The question hung in the air between us, an epitaph for our relationship. He had no answer. I turned away from him and faced my mother and Olivia. My mother was sobbing, a string of incoherent apologies spilling from her lips. "Amelia, I'm so sorry. I never knew." But Olivia was different. In the throes of her desperation, the raw, ugly truth finally erupted. "Yes, I knew," she shrieked, her voice tearing through the room. Tears streaked her expensive makeup, carving grotesque paths down her cheeks. "I knew he wasn't perfect, but he gave me everything. He saw me." Her attention snapped to me, her face contorted with a lifetime of resentment. "And you always had everything without even trying. You were the star of the academy, Dad's pride and joy, the brilliant officer. You were the sun, and I was just your shadow. I hated living in your shadow." Her confession didn't hurt me. 6 years ago, it would have shattered me. Now it was just pathetic. A profound, bottomless pity washed over me. "That shadow, Olivia?" I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Do you have any idea what lived in that shadow? For 6 years, I battled a depression so severe that some nights I considered ending it all. Your silence, your jealousy, that was the undertow that nearly drowned me. You can have your life, Olivia. You were always welcome to it, but you never had the right to destroy mine." Suddenly, a new kind of chaos erupted. Seeing his last pawn fall, Maxwell Thorne scrambled to his feet, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. He approached me, his voice a low, conspiratorial hiss. "All right, you win. You've made your point. What do you want? Money? A stake in the company? We can make a deal. Let's not make this any worse than it has to be." He didn't know that Marco, my operative, was standing just a few feet away. A directional microphone, disguised as a cell phone, pointed directly at us. I played along, feigning consideration. "A deal? Tell me, Maxwell, just how much did you pay that officer to ruin my life?" A smug reptilian smile spread across his face. He thought he had found my price. "5 million," he whispered. "A bargain for a multi-billion-dollar technology contract. You see, Amelia, everything has a price." "You're right," I said, looking over his shoulder. "And this is yours." On my cue, the ballroom doors burst open. A team of armed NCIS agents, led by a grim-faced Admiral Sterling, swarmed into the room. They moved with swift, professional purpose, their path leading directly to a stunned Maxwell Thorne. "Maxwell Thorne," an agent announced, his voice booming with authority. "You are under arrest for economic espionage and conspiracy to obstruct justice." The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut was the final sound of my old life ending. As they led him away, a disgraced groom in a tuxedo, the wedding reception officially became a federal crime scene. I stood in the center of the ruined hall, among the overturned chairs and weeping guests. There was no triumphant surge of joy. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness, a profound exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. The war was over, and I was just tired. As I prepared to leave, a small figure approached me hesitantly. It was a young boy, maybe 10 years old, the son of a high-ranking captain I knew. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with awe. "Ma'am, Admiral," he stammered, I want to be brave like you when I grow up." For the first time all night, a genuine, unforced smile touched my lips. I reached up to my uniform and unpinned a small, insignificant ribbon, a simple unit citation. I knelt down to his level and pressed it into his small, outstretched hand. "Be better than brave," I told him softly. "Be good." In that moment, I understood. The Hayes legacy wasn't about portraits in a library. It was about this, a quiet transfer of hope, a new definition of honor. And with that thought, I turned and walked out of the wreckage toward a future I would build for myself. A few weeks after the storm that was Olivia's wedding, I found myself in a quiet, wood-paneled office deep within the Pentagon. It was a formal but private ceremony. There were no cameras, no press, just a handful of high-ranking officials. The Secretary of the Navy officially declared my record cleared, my name exonerated, and my honor restored. Admiral Sterling then stepped forward and presented me with my officer's ceremonial sword, its hilt heavy and familiar in my hand. "Welcome home, Rear Admiral Hayes," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, profound pride. "Thank you, Michael," I replied, using his first name for the very first time. He simply smiled. "It's about time." That afternoon, back in my temporary quarters, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived by courier. It was a long, rambling letter from Olivia, filled with tear-stained apologies, frantic self-justifications, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I read every word, my expression neutral. Then I calmly stood up, walked over to the office-grade paper shredder in the corner, and fed the letter into its hungry maw. The machine whirred to life, turning her anguished prose into meaningless strips of confetti. Forgiveness isn't a gift I can bestow like a pardon. It's a journey, and it was one she would have to walk alone. My parents also tried to reach me, voicemails filled with choked-up regret, emails pleading for a chance to talk. I deleted them all without listening, without reading. That door was closed. It wasn't a decision born of hatred or a desire for continued revenge. It was simpler than that. I had just moved on. The space they once occupied in my heart was now quiet, peaceful, and reserved for myself. Admiral Sterling, now simply Michael to me, had a new mission for me. He made me the commander of a new global maritime security initiative, a program designed to counter the very threats that Thorne Maritime had represented. Its official name was the Global Maritime Defense Initiative, but my team and I had our own name for it, Project Neptune's Shield. It was the ultimate vote of confidence, a testament to his unwavering belief in me. With my Triton team as its core, We built a network to protect the oceans. We didn't do it with platitudes at charity galas or self-serving speeches on the covers of magazines. We did it with hard intelligence, cutting-edge technology, and the courage of dedicated men and women who worked in the shadows. I took the deepest pain of my life, the weapon that had been used against me, and forged it into a shield to protect others. This, I realized, was the true Hayes legacy. Not one of dusty portraits and inherited honor, but one that was earned, redefined, and put to service. The story ends a year later. I am standing on the bridge of the USS Michael Sterling, a new Arleigh Burke-class destroyer named in honor of my mentor. I am Rear Admiral Amelia Hayes, commander of this strike group, and we are on patrol in the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The salty wind whips through my short hair, cool and clean against my skin. Before me, the sun is beginning its ascent, painting the horizon in breathtaking shades of pink and gold, setting the surface of the water ablaze with light. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, my past is not a shadow at my back. It's just a story, a chapter that is over. The ocean, the very entity that was the stage for my greatest triumphs and my deepest despair, the force that nearly swallowed me whole, no longer feels like an adversary. It feels like my kingdom. I didn't just get my honor back. I learned a deeper truth. I learned that real honor is not what others think of you or what name you carry. It's about knowing in your own soul who you are when the storm hits and you are all alone. It's about the choices you make when you think no one is watching. I look out at the endless horizon where the sea meets the sky. There is no anger left, no bitterness. There is only a profound, quiet peace, a sense of gratitude for the journey, for the scars that taught me my own strength. I am the commander of this ship. I am the commander of this fleet. But more importantly, I am finally and completely the commander of my own destiny. My story began with a gate that was closed to me, but in the end, I learned that the most important gates are not the ones others can shut, but the ones we have the power to open for ourselves. Perhaps you've stood before a closed gate in your own life, a door slammed shut by family, by circumstance, by the belief that you weren't good enough. My journey taught me that true honor isn't about the family you were born into, but the one you build. It's not about the rank they give you, but the respect you earn for yourself. If my story resonated with you, you are not alone. There is a whole community of us who understand. Share your own story of resilience in the comments below, and subscribe to Chosen Revenge for more stories that remind us of our own strength. Because if you are standing at that gate now, remember this: you are the commander of your own destiny. You hold the key, and your dawn is waiting just over the horizon.